He believed dismissing her would make him look powerful, but he had no idea he was standing face to face with the one person who could take everything away. The boutique shimmered under soft golden lights, rows of designer handbags displayed like priceless art, and the faint scent of leather and polished marble filled the air. Customers moved slowly, carefully, as if even their footsteps had to match the price tags around them. And then she walked in. Emily Carter stepped through the glass doors in a simple gray sweater, worn jeans, and flat shoes that made almost no sound against the glossy floor. No one greeted her. No one needed to. In a place like this, people were evaluated before they were acknowledged. At the center of the showroom stood Vanessa Blake, the store manager, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her tailored suit sharp enough to signal authority from across the room. She didn't look up at first. She didn't have to. Years of experience had trained her to sense who mattered the moment they walked in. And Emily, in her eyes, did not. A young associate approached cautiously, offering a polite smile, but Vanessa raised a subtle hand, stopping him mid-step. "I'll handle this," she said under her breath, already deciding how the interaction would end before it even began. Emily paused near a display, her fingers brushing lightly across a leather bag, not with awe, but with quiet familiarity, like someone who understood craftsmanship rather than price. Vanessa finally approached, her heels clicking with measured precision. "Those pieces start at $5,000, she said smoothly, her tone wrapped in professionalism but edged with something colder. "Just so you're aware." Emily turned slowly, her expression calm, her eyes steady. "I'm aware," she replied, her voice soft but grounded. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, but Vanessa dismissed it instantly. She had seen confidence before, misplaced confidence, the kind that didn't belong in rooms like this. Around them, a few customers began to notice, their attention drawn not by volume, but by tension, the kind that hangs in the air before something shifts. Vanessa folded her arms. Slightly, her posture tightening. "If you're browsing, feel free," she added, though her tone suggested the opposite. "But we do prioritize serious clients." The words landed exactly as intended. Not loud, not aggressive, just precise enough to draw a line. Emily didn't react the way most people would. She didn't apologize. She didn't leave. Instead, she took one slow step forward, her gaze never leaving Vanessa's. The room seemed to quiet, conversations fading into a low hum as if the space itself was listening. Somewhere near the register, a cashier glanced up, sensing something off. Emily's voice came again, just above a whisper. "And how do you define serious?" Vanessa's lips curved slightly, confident again, comfortable in her role. "It's usually obvious," she said. A pause followed. A long one. The kind that stretches just enough to make people uncomfortable. And then Emily reached into her bag. Not hurried, not defensive, just deliberate. The faint movement caught the attention of more eyes across the showroom. Vanessa's confidence held, but something in her expression flickered, just for a second, something she couldn't quite explain. Because in that moment, the balance in the room had already begun to shift, and she didn't even realize it yet. Vanessa watched the movement of Emily's hand with a growing sense of irritation she could not quite explain, as if the woman in front of her was not following the script she had already written in her mind. In this store, everything had a rhythm, a hierarchy, a silent understanding of who belonged and who did not, and Emily was disrupting it without raising her voice, without making a scene, simply by standing there as if she had every right to be. Across the showroom, the low murmur of conversation faded further, replaced by glances and subtle shifts in posture as more people began to notice the exchange unfolding. A man in a tailored navy suit paused mid-step. A woman holding a designer clutch lowered it slightly, their attention drawn not by noise but by the tension that now filled the air like a quiet storm waiting to break. Vanessa straightened her shoulders, reclaiming control the only way she knew how. Through composure sharpened into precision. "If you are looking for something specific, I can have someone assist you in a more appropriate section," she said, her words carefully chosen, her smile polite but distant, a barrier disguised as service. Emily's hand remained inside her bag for a moment longer, then slowly withdrew, not with a wallet or a phone, but with nothing at all, her fingers empty, her expression unchanged. That small detail did not go unnoticed. Vanessa's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, a flicker of suspicion crossing her face before she dismissed it again. People like Emily did not walk into places like this with purpose. They wandered. They admired. They left. That was how it always worked. And yet, Emily did not move toward the exit. She did not retreat. Instead, she turned her attention back to the display in front of her, lifting one of the handbags with a familiarity that felt almost unsettling. She examined the stitching, the weight, the structure, not like a customer dreaming of ownership, but like someone evaluating a standard. Vanessa felt a slight tightening in her chest, a discomfort she immediately translated into annoyance. "Please be careful with that," she said, her tone firmer now, the warmth gone entirely. "Those are not samples." The words lingered in the air, sharper than before, and this time there was no attempt to soften them. Emily glanced up, her eyes meeting Vanessa's again, calm, steady, unwavering. "I know exactly what they are," she replied quietly. A pause followed, longer than any before, stretching across the marble floor and into the watching silence of the room. Somewhere near the register, the young associate who had been stopped earlier shifted nervously, glancing between the two women before discreetly stepping back and reaching for the store phone. His fingers hesitated above the buttons, then moved quickly, dialing a number he clearly knew by memory. Vanessa did not see it. She was too focused on reasserting the balance she felt slipping away. "Then you should also know," she continued, her voice now carrying just enough to reach the nearest customers, "that we reserve this experience for clients who understand the value of what they are handling." The implication was clear. The line had been drawn again, deeper this time. A faint murmur rippled through the onlookers, some nodding in quiet agreement, others watching with growing unease. Emily set the handbag back down with deliberate care, aligning it perfectly with the others, her movements precise, almost practiced. Then she took a single step closer to Vanessa. Not aggressive, not hesitant, just certain. The distance between them closed, and with it, the atmosphere shifted again, heavier now, more charged. Vanessa held her ground, but something behind her confidence began to crack, a subtle hesitation that only the most attentive eyes could catch. Because in that moment, without raising her voice, without changing her expression, Emily no longer looked like someone out of place. She looked like someone waiting. And somewhere in the background, the faint sound of a phone being answered signaled that something far bigger than a simple misunderstanding was about to unfold. The call lasted less than 10 seconds, but somehow it changed everything in the room. The young associate's voice had been low, almost a whisper, yet urgent enough to carry a weight no one else could hear. And when he hung up, his posture was no longer uncertain. He stood straighter, his eyes fixed on Emily with a mixture of disbelief and something closer to recognition. Across the showroom, the quiet tension thickened, like the air before a storm finally breaks. Vanessa noticed the shift, not directly, but in the way the room responded. Conversations had stopped entirely now. No one pretended to browse. No one checked their phones. Every set of eyes had settled into stillness, watching, waiting, sensing that something was no longer ordinary. Vanessa drew in a slow breath, forcing her composure back into place, though the ease she once carried had begun to slip. She was used to control, used to defining the pace of every interaction in this space. But for the first time, the rhythm felt off, unpredictable. "If there is nothing else," she said, her voice clipped but steady, "I would appreciate it if you did not disrupt the experience for other clients." The words sounded practiced, professional, but they no longer carried the same authority. Emily did not respond immediately. Instead, she let the silence settle, her gaze drifting briefly across the room, taking in the people, the displays, the carefully constructed image of perfection that surrounded them. Then her eyes returned to Vanessa, calm as ever. "Disruption usually comes from misunderstanding," she said quietly, "not from presence." The sentence hung in the air, simple but precise, and for a moment, Vanessa had no answer. That hesitation, small as it was, did not go unnoticed. The associate began walking toward them now, each step deliberate, no longer hesitant. His expression had changed completely, the earlier uncertainty replaced by something more certain, more grounded. Vanessa turned slightly, catching the movement in her peripheral vision, and a flicker of irritation crossed her face. "Daniel," I asked you to stay at the register, she said, her tone sharp again, reaching for control. But Daniel did not stop. He approached until he stood just behind her, close enough that his voice would not carry to the rest of the room. Yet somehow, every person present seemed to lean in any way. Ma'am, he said carefully, his voice tight. I think we need to reconsider this situation. Vanessa stiffened, her jaw tightening as she resisted the interruption. There is nothing to reconsider, she replied under her breath. I am handling it. Daniel hesitated, then lowered his voice even further, but the urgency in it was unmistakable. Head office is on the line, he said. They asked if Ms. Carter is currently in the store. The name landed like a quiet echo, almost soft enough to miss, but not one person in that room missed it. Vanessa blinked once, the confidence in her expression faltering for just a fraction of a second. What did you say? She asked, her voice no longer as steady as before. Daniel swallowed, his eyes flicking toward Emily, then back to Vanessa. They said her name is Emily Carter, he repeated, slower this time, as if giving the words more weight would make them clearer. The room felt smaller suddenly, tighter, the air pressing in from all sides. Vanessa turned her head, slowly, almost unwillingly, her gaze locking onto Emily again. The same simple sweater, the same calm expression, the same steady eyes that had never once wavered. But now, something else had changed. Not in Emily, in the way everyone else was looking at her. Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time since Emily had walked through those doors, Vanessa was no longer certain of what she was seeing. And in that fragile, suspended moment, the balance of power shifted completely, even before a single explanation was spoken. Vanessa felt the name settle into the room like something heavy and irreversible, the kind of truth that does not need to be repeated to be understood. Emily Carter. The words echoed quietly in her mind, refusing to align with the image she had already decided was real. That disconnect, that fracture between assumption and reality, began to show in the smallest details. The way Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly at her sides. The way her posture, once perfectly composed, now carried a hint of rigidity. She turned fully toward Emily, studying her again, but this time not with dismissal, not with judgment, but with something far more dangerous. Uncertainty. There must be some mistake, Vanessa said finally, her voice measured, but thinner than before. It was not directed at Emily. It was directed at the moment itself, as if saying it out loud could restore the version of events she preferred. Daniel did not respond. He simply stood there, silent, his earlier urgency replaced by quiet confirmation. Across the showroom, a subtle shift rippled through the crowd. The earlier curiosity had transformed into something sharper, more focused. People were no longer watching a minor inconvenience unfold. They were witnessing a realization in progress. Emily did not move. She did not step forward or step back. She simply stood there, allowing the silence to do the work for her. That silence pressed in on Vanessa, stretching longer than it should have, until it became impossible to ignore. Emily Carter. Vanessa repeated under her breath, as if testing the name against reality. Her gaze dropped briefly, then lifted again, searching for something she had missed, something that would explain how she had misread the situation so completely. But there was nothing to find. No sudden change in appearance. No dramatic reveal. Just the same woman who had walked in minutes earlier, unchanged and entirely composed. And that was the problem, because power, the kind Vanessa understood, was always visible. It was worn in tailored suits, expressed through tone, reinforced by recognition. But this was something else. If you are implying that you are someone of importance to this company, Vanessa said, her voice regaining a layer of control, though it felt forced now, then I would suggest clarifying that immediately. The words were firm, but they lacked the confidence they once carried. Emily's expression softened slightly, not in kindness, but in understanding, as if she had seen this exact moment play out before, just in different places, with different people. Importance is usually assigned after the fact, she said quietly. Not before. The sentence landed with quiet precision, and once again, Vanessa had no immediate response. Somewhere near the entrance, the glass doors opened, the soft chime cutting through the tension like a signal. Heads turned instinctively. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, his presence subtle but unmistakably authoritative. He paused just inside the doorway, scanning the room once, his gaze settling quickly on Emily. The recognition in his eyes was immediate, unguarded, and impossible to misinterpret. He adjusted his jacket and began walking forward, each step steady, deliberate, echoing faintly across the marble floor. Vanessa followed the movement, her expression tightening further with each passing second. Because now, the room was no longer waiting for an explanation. It was waiting for confirmation. And as the man approached, stopping just a few feet away from Emily, the final piece of uncertainty began to disappear. He gave a slight nod, respectful, almost deferential. "Miss Carter," he said clearly, his voice carrying just enough to reach the surrounding silence. And in that moment, the illusion Vanessa had built, the certainty she had relied on, the hierarchy she believed she controlled, all began to unravel without a single raised voice, without a single dramatic gesture, just the quiet weight of truth settling exactly where it belonged. The moment the man spoke her name, something irreversible settled over the room, not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. "Miss Carter." The words carried weight, not because of volume, but because of certainty. The man stood with quiet authority, his posture straight, his expression composed, yet unmistakably respectful. He did not question. He did not hesitate. He recognized. And that recognition changed everything. Vanessa felt it immediately, like the ground beneath her certainty had shifted just enough to make her lose balance. Her eyes moved from the man back to Emily, searching again, this time more urgently, as if the truth might reveal itself differently if she looked hard enough. But Emily had not changed. She still stood in the same simple sweater, the same calm expression, the same quiet presence that now felt entirely different. Not small, not out of place, just contained. "I was told you would be arriving later this afternoon," the man continued, his tone steady, professional, but carrying an undercurrent of deference that could not be mistaken. "We were preparing the back office for your review." A faint murmur rippled through the room, subtle but unmistakable. Customers who had once watched with detached curiosity now exchanged glances filled with realization. Associates who had kept their distance now stood frozen, their earlier assumptions collapsing in real time. Vanessa swallowed, the movement small but visible, her mind racing to reconstruct the situation into something she could still control. "You are saying," she began, her voice catching slightly before she steadied it, "that she is expected here?" The man turned his gaze toward Vanessa for the first time, and though his expression remained polite, there was a clarity in his eyes that left no room for interpretation. "She is not expected," he said carefully. "She is the reason this location exists." The sentence landed without force, yet it struck harder than anything else could have. A silence followed, deeper than before, stretching across the marble floors and into every corner of the boutique. Vanessa felt it press in around her, the realization now fully formed, impossible to deny, impossible to reshape. Her earlier confidence, once effortless, now felt distant, like something she had borrowed and suddenly lost. Emily finally moved. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just a small shift forward, her presence drawing every eye in the room without demanding it. She glanced briefly at the man, acknowledging him with a slight nod, then returned her attention to Vanessa. There was no anger in her expression, no satisfaction, just clarity. "I wanted to see how things were running," Emily said, her voice even, carrying easily through the silence. Without preparation, without adjustments. Each word was measured, intentional, and as they settled, the implications became impossible to ignore. Vanessa's lips parted, but no immediate response came. Her thoughts scrambled to catch up, to find something to hold on to, something to defend, but every path led back to the same conclusion. She had not just misjudged a customer. She had misjudged the one person whose judgment mattered most. Around them, the room remained completely still. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the soft background music seemed distant now, as if it no longer belonged to this moment. The man stepped slightly to the side, giving Emily the space that now felt rightfully hers. Vanessa's shoulders lowered just a fraction, the first visible sign that her control had slipped entirely. "Ms. Carter," she said finally, the name no longer uncertain, but heavy with realization. "If there has been any misunderstanding," Her voice trailed off, not because she did not know what to say, but because she understood that words alone would not be enough. Emily held her gaze for a moment longer, her eyes steady, unyielding, and in that silence, something far more powerful than anger took shape. Not punishment, not revenge, but judgment. And everyone in the room could feel it coming, even before she spoke again. Vanessa felt the silence stretch longer than she could endure, each second pressing harder against the confidence she had built over years of control, and for the first time in a long time, she did not know how to recover. The words she had started moments ago now felt empty, fragile, incapable of repairing what had already been revealed. Emily did not interrupt her. She did not rush the moment. She allowed it to unfold exactly as it needed to, because some realizations were not meant to be softened. They were meant to be felt. A misunderstanding? Emily repeated quietly, not as a challenge, but as a reflection, as if she were examining the word itself rather than the person who said it. Her voice remained calm, but there was a clarity in it now, something sharper beneath the surface. Vanessa straightened instinctively, reaching again for composure, for the version of herself that had always handled difficult situations with polished control. Yes, she said, more firmly this time, though the steadiness was forced. If there has been any confusion about your role or your intentions, I assure you that this store operates under strict standards, and we do our best to maintain a certain level of. Emily raised her hand slightly, not abruptly, just enough to pause the sentence without force. Vanessa stopped speaking immediately, the interruption subtle, yet absolute. The room remained silent. No one dared to move. Emily lowered her hand again, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. Standards are important, she said, but they are only as strong as the people applying them. The sentence settled into the room with quiet precision, and for a moment, no one breathed. Vanessa felt it land, felt the meaning behind it, not loud, not aggressive, but undeniable. She opened her mouth again, searching for a response, but found none that would hold. Because the truth was already there, fully formed, and no explanation could reshape it now. Emily took a small step forward, closing the space between them just enough to shift the dynamic completely. Not intimidation, not pressure, just presence. I have spent years building this brand, she continued, her voice even, controlled. Not just the products, not just the image, but the experience. The way people are treated the moment they walk through those doors. As she spoke, her eyes briefly moved across the showroom, acknowledging the space, the people, the atmosphere that had been so carefully constructed. Then they returned to Vanessa. What I saw today, she added, was not a misunderstanding. The words were simple, but they carried weight far beyond their volume. Vanessa's shoulders tightened, the last fragments of her certainty slipping away. Around them, the customers stood completely still, no longer observers, but witnesses. Associates who had once moved with quiet efficiency now remained frozen, their attention locked on the exchange unfolding in front of them. The man who had entered earlier remained to the side, silent, allowing the moment to belong entirely to Emily. Vanessa inhaled slowly, the breath measured, controlled, but it did not restore what had been lost. I was enforcing policy, she said finally, her voice quieter now, less certain. Ensuring that the environment remained consistent with our brand. Emily held her gaze, unblinking. No, she replied, just as softly. You were deciding who deserved to be here before you knew anything about them. The sentence landed, final, leaving no space for argument. And in that moment, the difference between authority and judgment became painfully clear. Vanessa looked around, just briefly, as if searching for support, but found none. The room had already shifted. The hierarchy she believed in had already changed. And as she turned back to Emily, the realization settled fully into place. Whatever came next would not be about explanation. It would be about consequence. The word consequence did not arrive with noise or force. It settled quietly into the room, heavier than anything that had been said before, and everyone felt it without needing it to be explained. Vanessa stood still, her posture no longer commanding but rigid, as if any movement might confirm what she was trying not to accept. For years, she had defined situations like this, controlled them, shaped them into outcomes that reinforced her authority, but this moment refused to bend. Emily did not rush forward. She did not raise her voice. She simply remained where she was, grounded, certain, allowing the weight of what had already been said to do the work for her. Policies exist to guide behavior. Emily continued after a long, measured silence. Not to justify it. Her voice remained calm, but the clarity in it left no room for interpretation. Vanessa felt her throat tighten slightly, a reaction she quickly tried to suppress, but it was too late. The room had already seen the shift. The customers who once stood as passive observers now watched with a different kind of attention, not curiosity, but understanding. They were no longer waiting to see what would happen. They were recognizing what had already happened. Vanessa drew in a breath, slow and controlled, her mind racing for something, anything, that could restore a sense of control. If there were any missteps in how the situation was handled, she said carefully, choosing each word as if precision could rebuild authority, they were not intentional. My responsibility is to maintain a certain standard for this environment. Emily listened without interruption, her expression unchanged, but there was something final in her stillness now, as if the decision had already been made before the explanation even began. Intent does not erase impact, Emily replied softly. The sentence landed with quiet force, and once again, Vanessa found herself without an answer. Around them, the stillness deepened. Even the smallest sounds, the faint hum of lighting, the distant shuffle of fabric, seemed to fade into the background. The man in the dark suit remained to the side, watching, but not interfering. This was no longer a situation that required mediation. It required acknowledgement. Emily took a single step to the side, her gaze briefly moving across the showroom, taking in the staff, the displays, the carefully maintained image that now felt fragile under the weight of what had been revealed. This brand was never meant to be about exclusion, she said, her voice steady, carrying clearly across the room. It was built on the idea that respect comes first, before price, before status, before assumption. As the words settled, a subtle shift moved through the employees standing nearby. Some lowered their eyes. Others stood a little straighter, as if realizing they had been part of something they had not fully questioned before. Vanessa remained where she was, but the certainty that once defined her presence had completely unraveled. Her shoulders lowered slightly, not in defeat, but in recognition that the position she held no longer protected her. I have given years to this store, she said finally, her voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier sharpness. Everything I have done has been to protect what it represents. Emily met her gaze, steady, unwavering. Then you should understand it better than anyone, she said. The words were not harsh. They were not raised, but they carried a truth that could not be avoided. Vanessa's eyes flickered, just for a moment, the realization fully settling in. This was no longer about defending her actions. It was about facing them. The room remained silent, every person present holding their breath without realizing it, because they all knew the same thing now. The moment of explanation had passed. What came next would define everything. No one spoke, because everyone understood that whatever happened next would not just resolve a situation, it would define it. Vanessa stood in place, her composure no longer something she controlled, but something she was trying to hold together. The confidence that once shaped every word she spoke had been replaced by something quieter, something uncertain, and for the first time, she was no longer leading the moment. Emily remained still, her presence calm but unmistakably firm, as if the decision had already been made long before this conversation reached its end. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but deliberate, giving space for the truth to settle completely before anything else was added. Then Emily spoke. This store reflects more than product, she said, her voice even, measured, carrying clearly across the room without needing to rise. It reflects the people trusted to represent it. The words moved through the space slowly, giving everyone time to understand not just what was being said, but what it meant. Vanessa's gaze dropped for a brief moment, not out of submission, but out of realization. Every decision she had made in the past few minutes, every word, every assumption, now stood in direct contrast to the very standard she believed she was protecting. Emily took a step forward, not closing the distance completely, but enough to make it clear that this was no longer an abstract conversation. Leadership is not measured by control, she continued. It is measured by judgment. and judgment begins the moment someone walks through the door. A quiet shift moved through the employees nearby. Some straightened instinctively. Others avoided eye contact, recognizing the weight of what was being said. This was no longer about one interaction. It was about a pattern, a mindset, a way of seeing people that had gone unquestioned for too long. Vanessa lifted her eyes again, meeting Emily's gaze, and for the first time, there was no defense left in them. Only understanding. "I understand," she said quietly, the words no longer rehearsed, no longer calculated. Just honest. Emily held her gaze for a moment, as if measuring the sincerity behind it, not harshly, not coldly, but carefully. Because this was not about humiliation. It was about clarity. The man in the dark suit shifted slightly to the side, attentive but silent, allowing the moment to remain exactly where it belonged. The room stayed completely still, every person present aware that they were witnessing something that would be remembered long after the day ended. Emily finally exhaled softly, a subtle release of tension that had never been visible but had always been there. "Understanding is where it starts," she said. "But it does not end there." The sentence hung in the air, signaling what everyone already felt. This was not simply a conversation. It was a turning point. Vanessa nodded once, slowly, accepting what that meant, even if the full weight of it had not yet fully landed. Around them, the boutique remained silent, but the atmosphere had changed completely. It no longer felt like a place defined by exclusivity. It felt like a place being redefined in real time. Emily glanced briefly across the room once more, taking in the employees, the customers, the environment that now carried a different kind of energy. Then her attention returned to Vanessa, steady, composed, final. And in that moment, without raising her voice, without making a scene, she made it clear that what came next would not just affect one person. It would reshape everything. The decision did not arrive with drama. It arrived with clarity, the kind that leaves no room for doubt and no space for negotiation. Emily stood quietly, her presence steady, her expression unchanged, yet everything around her felt different, as if the entire room had shifted to align with a truth that could no longer be ignored. Vanessa remained in place, her posture no longer rigid, but grounded in something she had not carried before, awareness. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of understanding, of recognition, of consequence settling exactly where it belonged. Emily took a slow breath, her gaze moving once more across the boutique, not as an outsider, but as someone who had shaped every detail of what stood before her. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. "This location will undergo a full internal review." The words were simple, but they carried authority that did not need to be reinforced. A subtle movement passed through the employees, not panic, not fear, but attention, a quiet readiness to listen, to learn, to adjust. Emily's eyes returned to Vanessa, not harsh, not unforgiving, but precise. "Leadership positions are not just responsibilities," she continued. "They are reflections. And when that reflection no longer aligns with the values of this brand, it has to change." Vanessa nodded slowly, her earlier certainty replaced by something deeper, something more honest. There was no argument left to make, no defense that could undo what had already been revealed. She understood now, not just the outcome, but the reason behind it. "I understand," she said quietly, and this time, the words carried weight, not as a response, but as acceptance. Emily held her gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod, acknowledging the shift, not as a victory, but as a necessary step forward. The man in the dark suit stepped forward slightly, prepared to follow through on what had been set in motion, but Emily raised her hand just enough to pause him. "Not yet. There was still something more important than action. This is not about removing people," Emily said, her voice carrying across the room, reaching every employee, every witness. "It is about rebuilding perspective." The sentence settled into the space, and for the first time since the moment began, the atmosphere changed again, not tense, not heavy, but grounded. Employees who had once stood uncertain now looked forward with a different kind of attention, one shaped by awareness rather than assumption. Customers who had watched in silence now understood that they had witnessed something rare, not a confrontation, but a correction. Emily turned slightly, her gaze softening as she looked at the space she had built, the brand she had protected, the values she refused to compromise. Then she took a step forward, her presence no longer questioned, no longer misunderstood, simply recognized. And as she moved, the room did not react with noise or applause. It remained still, respectful, aware. Because sometimes, the most powerful moments are not the loudest ones. They are the ones that change how people see, how they think, how they choose to act long after the moment has passed. Vanessa stood quietly, watching, not as someone defeated, but as someone who had finally seen clearly. And in that quiet realization, something far more important than authority was restored. Respect. Respect often reveals itself when you least expect it. If you enjoy stories that uncover truth, dignity, and hidden strength, do not forget to like and subscribe. The next story might just change the way you see the world. Thank you so much for watching.